Okay, Mike, I'm going to reintroduce you. So Dr. Mike Thompson is going to be speaking about improving our food and physical activity environments. Dr. Thompson's a professor of agricultural economics at the U of A Fayetteville and with the U of A System Division of Agriculture. Dr. Thompson's research emphasizes the interface between the food distribution system and human health. And in partnership with Arkansas Center for Health Improvement, Mike and his colleagues have been working to better understand environmental contributors to excess weight gain among Arkansas school children, and are using machine learning to better identify student populations at the greatest risk for childhood obesity. He's working on the Economics of Food Choice and Nutrition Assistance Program, and he has received his bachelor's and master's degrees from Utah State University in agricultural economics and his PhD from the University of Minnesota in agricultural and applied economics. And I guess there's like brand new news hot off the press yesterday. On July 1st, Dr. Thompson will be joining Faye W. Bozeman College of Public Health at UAMS as the Governor Sidney S. McMath Endowed Chair in Obesity Prevention, and he'll be the director of the Center for the Study of Obesity. So congratulations on that. Sounds like a really great position. So you'll actually be closer to all of the participants in Little Rock. So feel free to reach out to Dr. Thompson.
Yes, please do, because the reason I was interested in that position was from the UAMS and the College of Public Health. I think the impact of the work can be amplified, and because a lot of what's happening in the state is centered in Little Rock, and so there would be better collaboration opportunities. Awesome. All right, so should I take it away, Dr. Baum?
Yep, go ahead.
All right, well, thank you so much for joining today. So I was asked to talk about improving our food and physical activity environments. And so I'm going to start, let me get my mouse centered, with just an introduction to a lot of the data that we're working with comes from the BMI screening program of Arkansas public school children. And many of you are probably aware that beginning in the 2003-2004 academic year, the state started screening public school children for BMI and sending BMI reports home to parents. So we've been collaborating with the Arkansas Center for Health Improvement to try to understand what might be influencing BMI in childhood. And I just got some summary data from the full history that we are working with right now. And this is all, when we ever work with this data, we're in a secure room, no internet, anything. It's I go to Little Rock physically and sit in a secure data room to work with this. And even then the data are blinded. So I don't know who anybody is, but we're working with this data under very controlled circumstances. But I want to point out some things. Here on this right panel, you can see the trends, and this is across the full 16 years, in BMI as children age. So in kindergartners, almost 16% of the children are obese. But by the time we get to 6th grade, it goes up to nearly 25%. And it's kind of levels off around 4th grade. So if we're going to prevent childhood obesity, we need to prevent it early. And we may need to even be preventing it before they ever enter the public school system. Here, I want to just to give you an idea of what a BMI Z-score is, because I'll be using that in some of what I present today. So you can see this gray line, and those of you who can think back to your statistics class or who use statistics regularly will recognize this as a normal distribution. And this is what the CDC reference BMI for age and sex growth charts would look like. There would be normally distributed. Okay, the average half of the children on that growth chart would be above 0, half would be below 0. Okay, this where I'm mousing, you should be able to see my mouse, and where I'm mousing over right now, those are the kindergartners. It still looks like a normal distribution, but we see a little bit of a bulge right here to the right, and it's shifted to the right. The mean of Arkansas kindergartners is not centered at 0. But then here's 2nd graders, and then we go to 4th graders into 6th graders. You can see that we get something that doesn't even look normal any longer. And so the point I'm trying to make is that in a healthy population, according to CDC, we should have 5% of the members obese, because that's how obesity is defined in childhood, as above the 95th percentile. But in Arkansas at kindergarten, we have 16%, and by the 6th grade, we have 25%. Okay, so let's get to the topic of the talk, which is food environment and exercise environment. And so I'm going to start with the bad news, just to get that out of the way. We have been looking probably over the last decade, trying to understand how does the food environment impact childhood obesity. We've looked at fast food restaurants, we've looked at food deserts. Do you live in a food desert? Did a store close and you became a food desert? We've looked at dollar stores, we've looked at convenience stores. We've got studies published on all of these topics, and we just don't see big impacts. I mean, we can find statistically significant effects. Sometimes but they're close to zero, and it would be hard to make a case that we should, the state should restrict fast food restaurants, for example. Okay, it would be difficult to have that backed up with evidence. And these tend to be consistent with the broader literature on the food environment. And so it's been a lot of work, but it's been kind of frustrating because what you'd really love as a researcher is, oh, this is going to make a difference. Look, we found something that could really have an impact, and we're just not getting that with our work in the food environment. So let's qualify this though. Does it mean the food environment doesn't matter? And I think the answer to that is an emphatic no. So I've cited a little study. Well, it's a review piece, a discussion piece. It's very accessible and I think very interesting. I'd encourage you to look at it if you have time. But how does the food environment matter? And I think once we start thinking about the food environment, we can start to maybe plan our research and our interventions in a way that that helps. So the food environment facilitates change, and let's think about that. It enables health preference learning. Okay, if I am not ever exposed to healthy foods in the environment, how do I learn healthy preferences? Okay, so we think about like the fresh fruit and vegetable program in elementary school. That's exposing children to new foods that they may not have had elsewhere. It enables preference learning. It facilitates expression of healthy preferences. So if the child likes baby carrots or pineapple or something they've had in the FFVP program, if they live in an area where they have access to a supermarket and their parents have the wherewithal to get those fresh foods, okay, they can express those healthy preferences outside of school, for example. And then it allows reassessment of healthy preferences. If I'm trying to make a change in my diet, well, if I have access to a supermarket, that enables it, for example. I have access to healthy foods along the perimeter that Dr. Baum was talking about. And then it can create some virtuous feedback loops. So if the environment is providing more healthy foods, well, that may drive demand and drive more retailers to provide them. And so what I think, if we're interested in the food environment, where we need to be looking, where we weren't quite looking, is we won't see these in the average effects. So I would expect, if I was to look, for example, at and in fact, we had a thesis student who did this a couple of years ago. Her Rachel Spencer did this in her thesis. Her results, we don't have them published, but they're in her thesis. She looked at FNEP participants, the Expanded Food Nutrition Education Program. She looked at participants who completed the FNEP program. And those of you who are familiar with the program, there's a healthy eating index assessed before the program starts and one after. So we're not looking at teaching to the test. The healthy eating index improves. Part of it could be because the participants know more about nutrition by the end of their 8 lessons. But then she compared the change in the healthy eating index for those who were in food deserts and those who were not. Or really, she was looking at access to a supermarket within a reasonable distance of the home. And those who had access actually had higher healthy eating indexes. So I think when we allow, and we can think of the food environment as enabling. A supermarket has healthy foods, but why shop around the perimeter? Well, that's where the fresh foods are, and when you're internal, focus on those things that Dr. Baum mentioned. But if I'm at the supermarket, I can get lots of energy-dense foods, very low cost as well. It enables unhealthy preferences too. And so on average, we may not see an effect in our studies, but I think if we start looking at a little different way, we might see something in the food environment. So now let's move to the good news. And I'm going to talk about a study that we got published. It came out in early 2020. I think I've got the year as 2019. That was when it was accepted. But this is on recreation environments. And here, I think we have some pretty convincing evidence that a better recreation environment matters. And so, Arkansas, and we're talking about these top two counties here in the top left, and Washington County and Benton County. And some of you are in one of these towns right now. And so here's the population centers, okay, from Fayetteville up to Bella Vista. So just kind of getting our geography. This is what the trail system looked like in the year 2004. Now, this is the year that the BMI screening program began in Arkansas. And so, yeah, there's a few trails. The trails were starting to come in, but they generally didn't get you anywhere. Okay, you could walk up and down, but you couldn't go places necessarily on the trails, but they were starting. We started to have some trails. This is what the trail system looked like in 2009. Okay, now we can get all the way from Lake Fayetteville down to South Fayetteville on this part of the backbone of the Razorback Greenway. You can see parts of the backbone starting to form. This is what it looked like in 2014, okay? And then this is what it looked like in 2016. And so you can see that the communities are connected, there's more access to trails, and that's expanded right during the time that the BMI screening program was going. Okay, so we measured how far would people be from a trail, and this is just in the two-county area. And so we did some different measures just because you can imagine if you go on the trails, it's kind of complicated. The trail might go right behind your home, but it might still be a mile before you can get to an access point because of fences and creeks, etc. So we looked in the literature and we measured trail differences a few different ways. So we kind of drew a circle around the home, that's one way. And then we looked at, how could you get to the trail following a roadway? We went up and down the trails with little GPS units and identified places where people could actually walk from a community and access a trail. There wasn't a fence blocking access to the trail and so forth. And so, could you, where would the trail access points be? And that helped us get the network distances. And then we just did, are you close to a trail at all? So we drew a circle around your house and how many miles of trail fall in that circle? Okay. So we're doing some different measures here. And I'll only present results from one measure, but if you're interested, you can look at the paper and the results are fairly robust. Okay, so I want to talk a bit about the data set. The information we had when we were doing the study, as I said, we had the trails as of 2016. Sadly, and those of you in academia know, you have results, it takes a while to get them published sometimes. And the review process is lengthy. So I would love to do more on this with our more up-to-date data. But I want just to point out a few things. So one thing that reviewers did point out to us is, people could be moving purposefully to try to get to trails as they come in. And so is it the trails that matter, or are people who have greater desires for exercise moving, self-selecting into trails? And that's a good point. And so if you look at, we've got movers, we've got non-movers. We know people who were there before the trail started and those who may have moved away or towards trails. And the movers tend to, if you notice, have higher BMI Z-scores. And if we look down here for the free or reduced meals, they also have quite a bit higher rates of eligibility for free or reduced meals. So what's happening, I think, is that the movers tend to be less affluent is what's going on here. And you're aware of the paradox of poverty. That's being reflected here in the higher BMI Z-scores. Okay, and so 18% of the movers were overweight, above the 85th percentile on the CDC growth chart. 17% of the non-movers, so not a big difference there, but a bigger difference in terms of obesity. So about 18% of the non-movers versus just over 21% of the movers. Okay, and we can go down the list. You can see, I want to kind of point out, this is Northwest Arkansas, and these averages are probably lower than the state. Just because the BMI rates in Northwest Arkansas are slightly lower than the state at large. But I want to point out the population groups. So the biggest minority group would be the Hispanic children in this study, compared to, statewide, we have less representation of African-American children in the Northwest Arkansas area. So just so you can kind of see, how this population might differ from the state at large. Okay, so here's our results, and these are the impact, and this is the radial distance. How how much trail is within a half mile versus a half mile, 2/3 mile, and 1 mile. And so being close to a trail matters, and a negative sign here, and the stars just indicate that it's statistically meaningful. The more stars there are, the more statistically meaningful it is. But we get a negative 0.04 standard deviations drop in BMI Z-score among children who are within a half mile of the trail. And this is fairly consistent for both the movers and the non-movers. For all, but it really drives the non-movers. Okay, so the movers, we don't have the same effect. Sorry, I misspoke there. I looked at my columns just a little bit wrong here. But you can see that there's you can see that there's an effect here. And then the effect is being close to a trail. The effect doesn't increase much if we expand it out to a mile. Is if you're close to a trail, that's when the effect really matters. And the thing I want to point out about this is these results are fairly robust. So it doesn't matter if it's boys or girls, we see significant effects. The thing that matters is younger. So if we have younger children, we see bigger effects than older children. But what explains that? I think a lot of it, sorry, I'll just go up to my slides real quick. A lot of it is this pattern you see right here. By the time the children are older, if we're going to prevent excess weight gain, it's got to be when they're younger. And so this is, I think, what's happening in those results for the older versus the younger children. Sorry, don't mean to make you sick here. Okay, and the thing about the trails, the other group that's not statistically significant is those children that pay full price for their school meals. Basically, they didn't qualify for free or reduced meals, just a complement of this set. And they're the more affluent children. And so those two exceptions, the older children and the more affluent children, and I think there's good explanations for those, we see fairly consistent across the board trail effects. And the other thing I'll point out is if you've had longer exposure to trails, we see a bigger effect than if you've had shorter exposure to trails. So it's pointing to the trails making a difference. Now, whether 5 standard deviations in a Z-score is clinically meaningful, I'll leave that to people with other expertise, but we can see a beneficial effect here in terms of preventing excess weight gain, and we can see it's fairly consistent across the board. Okay, well, to get something published, you've got to convince people, because this is not a randomized trial by any means. Unfortunately, we just don't have the money it would take to build trails in a random fashion and test. Okay, we have to kind of take what the world gives us. But in this case, we have some ways to kind of see, could this be something that's not due to self-selection or to trails, locating where people want them and who already have healthier preferences, for example. So in this little diagram, it shows a falsification test we were able to use to try to look at the trails. And so a trail tomorrow should not be affecting my BMI today, should it? I know we're on Zoom, so you can't, it's a rhetorical question, you can't respond very handily. But something in the future shouldn't affect a health outcome today. And so the beauty of this is we are able to track children longitudinally, and the trails came in with time over this study period. So here we have a household 1, and household 1, they were never close to a trail in 2004 or 2005, right? But look at household 2. There was a trail close to them in 2005, but not close to them in 2004. So we would expect that the child who lives in household 2, their 2004 BMI Z-score couldn't have been influenced by the trail that didn't open until 2005. And sure enough, when we run that model, looking at future trails on today's BMI, we don't see nearly as large of an effect. It's still negative, but it's not statistically meaningful. Okay? And actually, as a practical matter, it's basically 0. So we don't see future trails affecting today's BMI, which means that the main results of the study, which are trails in your presence on your current BMI, current and past trails on your current BMI, probably reflect the impact of that activity in the environment. Okay, so we also just kind of took that big map and we moved the trail system, because on a computer, the trail system is just a series of polylines, right? And so we could just move the polylines a little bit over so that they're not really where they're supposed to be. And then we would compute and redo the whole study, pretending like the trails were 50 yards to the right, and then 100 yards to the right, and so on and so forth. I think we did a distance of up to 5 miles. Anyway, we did 100 of these permutations. And the true outcomes is right here in this red line, and these are all the placebo or false outcomes. And you can see that the true outcome is lower than all but just a handful, suggesting again that the trails are probably mattering. Okay, so we have to try to make these findings to really test, do we have something going on here because it's not a randomized trial, or is it just or is it just fallacy of correlation? We're trying to test that and say, aha, it looks like based on these two robustness checks that trails probably matter in this context. Okay, so the key findings that we find on the trails is that the largest beneficial effect is for the Hispanic children and the lower income children. And so if we look at the BMI, I didn't present these data, but if I was to segment the BMI data by different race and ethnicity and by income status based on free and reduced lunch eligibility, we would see that children who qualify for free or reduced lunches, lower income children in other words, tend to have higher rates of obesity, higher BMI Z-scores. That's also true across the board on average for Hispanic children. So these suggest that the trails could actually be helping to address some disparities in socioeconomic, some disparities in rates of obesity in Arkansas. And I think that's important. Okay? And then they're important for younger versus older children. I've kind of addressed why we think that is. Okay, that's when their BMIs are really starting to where excess weight gain really occurs. It starts to level off as they get into adolescence. And so now let's put our policy hats on and let's think for a minute. Do trails make sense? Well, they're expensive to put in, but once they're in, they're very low cost at the point of consumption. Okay, I don't have to have a lot of fancy equipment to go and enjoy a trail. All I have to do is be able to walk. And a bicycle might be nice, but there's programs that are helping to get bicycles into availability for children. And maybe the trails mean that bicycle prices are going to fall because we've got more and more people wanting to bicycle and more bike shops and more competition. And I think that if we go back to the Hawks et al. Paper, there's that kind of virtuous cycle happening where it's easier to engage in physical activity because there might be more bicycles in the community. And so the cost of using the trail is low at the point of consumption. Now, the trails are also nice in the sense that they don't restrict other choices. So if we did bans, so if we said, okay, we're going to restrict dollar stores, well, what's going to happen? There's probably going to be a lawsuit. The dollar store companies don't want the restriction. There's going to be some contention. You're restricting the activity of someone because you're worried about trying to improve the environment for someone else. But the trail doesn't do that. We're not restricting anybody's choices with the trail. We're just making another choice available. And so that's why I think they're very politically feasible, maybe more so than some other ways to try to improve the environment. Okay, so we're continuing to do work on the environment. I think in terms of food environment, we are trying to do a lot more work on that early childhood area. We don't have any publications at this point, but we're trying to look at WIC, what causes children to stay on WIC, because we see a big drop off after the infant package ends. And does that depend on the environment? Because if it's hard to get to a supermarket, it may be hard to take advantage of WIC benefits, the child package, for example. So there's a lot of things that we're doing in the environment space. And I really appreciate the chance to be here today and to kind of share a taste of what we're doing, because I hope you'll reach out to me if there's ways that we could collaborate or ways that our program could relate to the things that you're doing. So with that, Dr. Baum, I'll turn it over to questions.
Great. Does anyone have any questions for Dr. Thompson? I think I remember when you started this data collection, so it's always nice to see the end result.
Yeah.
Emma did just put the link to the midway survey in the chat for those of you participating in the first survey. So I have a question. Do you think that the trails as they are in Northwest Arkansas make the most sense?
Well, that's actually something we thought a lot about doing the study because the concern is that those who are more politically corrected, suppose a trail, and I think there was some debate whether the trails were desirable attributes. Do you want a trail in your backyard or not? There's more people coming from outside your neighborhood into your neighborhood if there's a trail there. And so the way the trails have gone is they kind of followed the creek beds. And if you look, that's just because that was the way they were cheapest to build. And some of those box culverts have been converted into underpasses for the roads. And it was just because those bridges are expensive to put in. And so the more they can, and a lot of the times, there was an easement around the creek or whatever the right zoning term is. And so it was easy to build them along the creek beds or along, through streets that had bigger sideways to make a street side trail. And a lot of times those didn't go through the more affluent areas. If you look at that, if you were to overlay, I think, income by block group or median household or median home value by block group, you'd see the trails started in the lower income areas and then went to the higher income areas. And the higher income areas said, well, we kind of like these trails by us, and so I don't know that they went in the best way. I don't know what planning went in, but I do think that getting them in however you can is going to be beneficial, provided they're accessible to the community.
Yeah. I guess, because I lived in the Netherlands for 6 years. So biking, I couldn't drive a car. I was too afraid of hitting a cyclist.
Yeah.
But I always just sometimes wish around here, and maybe we'll get there, is that, the trails also intersected more with like your grocery store, or like I live in Springdale. So getting to the U of A via the trails is difficult, but I hope one day that they allow us to incorporate it more into like our lifestyle, our daily lifestyle.
I mean, when I moved to Fayetteville 23 years ago, if you rode a bicycle, you were taking your life in your hands, unless it was some kind of place where you were sure there were no cars. And then you were probably out in the country and you'd have dogs to deal with, right?
Yeah.
So you were just, it just was hard to bicycle around here. I have a trail from my home to my house. I can bicycle to work every day, unless the trails are slick because of ice or something.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And I'm never going to worry about getting hit by a car. And in the winter, they're fully lit. And that's another thing I think that's important. People want to feel like they're safe on the trail. And so they're fully lit. And, if my bike light goes out, I'm not going to be riding blind, so.
I just noticed your bike.
Yes. I brought it there as a prop.
Yeah. And we see Linda made a comment also that in West Little Rock, there's a lot of trails.
Yeah.
That help keeping kids active.
Mike, this is Phil. I got a question for you. So put on your economist hat. Do you have an idea of what Fayetteville, Northwest Arkansas has spent on trails? Question A. And then B, if you took some of the projections for your findings and then you've got to add health risk and cost, incremental cost too. So if we reduce the BMI by 0.5%, 1%, whatever that number is, then that's what the payback is going to be. Because I think that's what legislatures are typically small business people. If I give you $1, when can I get it back?
Right. Yeah, and I don't know the installation costs. So many of you, I'm sure, are involved in Healthy Active Arkansas and may have attended the community meetings. And at one point, and I don't know why I didn't write it down, it was, they had cited something, a mayor had said what they thought it would cost to put a trail in per mile. And and I didn't write it down, so I'm not going to say the number. I have a vague remembrance in my head, but it's probably wrong. I don't want to be wrong. But I think that data, those data would be available. We just need to find them. I mean, the Northwest Arkansas Planning Commission could probably help with that. I mean, I don't think this is secret. And then the other thing that happens with trails that makes them easy to put in is there's highway funds, and some of the highway funds are actually restricted for things like these rest areas, or for multi-use transportation like trail systems. So communities have access to some sources of funds to do this. And then one thing I'm really excited to be able to do from the UAMS standpoint in the future is we really do want, with time, to be able to use an all-payer claims database that the Arkansas Center for Health Improvement has been developing, and that's been developed with some Arkansas Biosciences Institute funding, to really see what are the costs of these obesity-related illnesses over the lifespan, and how would and we would, at some point in the future, probably be able to say what would a negative 0.05 standard deviation reduction in BMI Z-score mean for costs down the road later in life. And so we want to answer those questions they're very good questions. I just don't have answers for them right now.
Saying I don't know is a good starting point.
Yeah. And I see there's thank you for the questions in the chat. I'm really looking forward to exploring those trails in West Little Rock at UAMS. And so I appreciate that heads up. And then I would say, in terms of who could facilitate, my initial thought, and some of you may have thoughts on who could facilitate, development of trails in areas of the state where they're not. I would reach out to and there are some interesting things going on in the Delta, biking trails and so forth. But I would reach out to the Healthy Active Arkansas group, and let me see if I can get their website in the chat potentially. Let's see, let me Google them really quick, because there's a priority working group working specifically on better physical activity. And I think their website works better in Chrome. My default here is Firefox, but I should be able to get their URL. And there's probably some ways to reach out to Healthy Active Arkansas just for some ideas, and in terms of ways to make communities more accessible. So I put their URL to the state website there and there should be, I'm sure if we look at the About link, that there is a way to.
Yeah. And Erin Howie, who's the co-leader for Defend, she's also involved in the physical activity side of Healthy Active Arkansas.
Oh, excellent.
So she might also be able to answer any questions, or at least point you to the right person.
Yeah.
And I had seen a hand raised before. Does anyone else have a question?
Well, yeah, I was just concerned about the safety of the trails recently, like in the past couple of years, because homeless settlers, I'm at the junction now of 3 good trail systems and North Fayetteville, and the homeless people are concerned because they tend to settle off really close, right beside the trails.
Yeah.
And they are well lit at night, but they're still what you'd call isolated after dark. Right. And I would not want to be on the trail by myself after dark. And from some stories I've heard from people who hike every Friday on the trails all over Fayetteville, you don't go alone, even during the daytime. They won't let you go alone in this group.
Yeah, I think that's a valid concern. I haven't felt threatened, but I'm a 6'4", 200 profound guy too, so.
Yeah.
So, it's a lot different, I know from my perspective, and I think your concern is definitely, has validity. And I don't have a good answer to that other than, I do see, police officers on the trail frequently. They're being monitored. Are they being monitored adequately? That's a question.
Well, color me stupid. I'm going to err on the side of not caution.
No, I'm not. That's certainly not,
And use them.
not
I mean,
how I would
I'm probably
characterize that.
Probably going to use them until I have something bad happen to me, and then
Yeah, well,
and then
my
I'll have-
13-year-old daughter, I go with her. I wouldn't want her out alone on the trails.
no, I wouldn't either. But me, like I say, until something bad happens, I'm more proud of them than I am afraid of them.
Yeah.
By phone.
No, thank you for those comments.
Any other questions for Dr. Thompson? No. Well, thank you for speaking and donating your time to us today. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for
And
having me.
congratulations on your next big step.
Well, thank you. And it's a little terrifying moving, but I really want to work with those in the state collaboratively and together try to address these issues that our state faces. And so I hope you'll reach out to me with ideas if there's any way we can be of help.
Yeah. Thanks, Mike.
Thank
And
you.
take care, and everyone have a really nice weekend. And don't forget to fill out the midway assessment. Thank you.
Thank you.